Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive, and today I have a new guest in studio in the Nook. So I always ask my guests to introduce themselves. So your name, sort of who you are, how you identify for the audience at home.
Sure. My name is Gonzalo Cordova. I am primarily a comedy writer, but I like writing drama as well. And I identify as he, him.
It's always interesting.
And also, I identify, I guess, as Latino or Latinx. Those are, I'm comfortable with both.
Got it. That's probably the broadest question I have, just because it could, whatever that means to you.
Do people always answer it a little differently, like interpret
Every
it?
single one. Yeah.
I answer it, I try to answer, because it's like, I'm on Twitter a lot, and that's what the bio is always.
It's very Twittery.
So I'm like, let me just go for the boilerplate Twitter version of this answer.
People just give you their Twitter bio. So,
yeah, I don't want to give you my resume and then one tiny joke. That's my Twitter bio.
The question I always follow up with is another broad question. It's like, where are you from?
So my family is from Ecuador, and I spent the first 6 years of my life in Ecuador and Panama, and then moved to South Florida. So I grew up in Broward County in a place actually called Plantation, Florida, which is a terrible name for a place in the South, but that's where I grew up. And then I lived in Boston, I lived in New York, and now I'm here.
Great, perfect. So I like to get like the background story. I always like to ask about people's parents. So like, what do you know about your parents' story, your grandparents' stories?
Sure. So both of my parents grew up in Guayaquil in Ecuador, and let me see, what's their story? let me think of every story they've ever told me. So they lived there. They both moved here when they were younger, like 17, 18, and lived in New York for a while. But then they went back to Ecuador, and then they met there, and they got married, and my mom had my brother, and when she was a few months pregnant, my uncle got very sick, and he lived in New York, so she flew back, and she was there for a while, and she ended up having my brother there, so he had citizenship, and she decided to do that with all her kids, and just kind of make sure that we all. I don't know if this is too much information.
It's interesting.
This is like on, but that is a big part of our story of how he kind of. All of us were born here, all of my siblings.
Interesting.
But we didn't grow up here for the first few years of our lives. I'm the youngest, so I'm the most. I guess the word is, I don't know if it's like tricky, but I'm the most Americanized probably of all of them, because I came here when I was 5 or 6 years old. But my dad worked in sales. He's worked in sales his whole life. So he used to, when we were in Panama, he's worked for Johnson & Johnson, probably a very evil company. But we were, doing pretty well. And that was probably like the best we ever did. And then we were in Panama during Noriega, so he's a dictator, bad guy. Yeah. And I think my mom kind of got sick of that, and they wanted to move us to Peru, which also had some conflict at the time. I think this is accurate. I would have to double check with them. And my mom was like, "No, screw that. I'm tired of living in weird circumstances and fear. So let's just go." We had a lot of family in Florida. So they packed up, they went to Florida, and it's weird because I think maybe this is what happens to a lot of people, but when you move to United States, it's really like starting over. So my dad had to kind of start over, and you kind of, to put it in blunt terms, kind of go down a little bit in the social economic scale. We
always mention it like the credits don't transfer.
The credits do not transfer. He had a very nice job there, and he kind of had to start over. And he's been in sales his whole life, but and he does really well. And he's his strongest attribute has always, which I think is transferred onto his kids, which is very immigrant mentality, but of being like a really hard worker. And that's what you do to like prove yourself here, which is, as good and bad, for sure. But, we grew up in Florida, and it's, I'm really glad that we're here. I'm really glad that we moved here, because I feel like it's given me a lot of different kind of perspectives to have lived in all these places, even though primarily I've lived here most of my life. And also I think it's like kind of good for me, because whenever I'm back in South America and I meet people who grew up with with their parents having like a lot of money, they're always like kind of spoiled, and I hate them.
Yeah.
Is that like an awful thing to say?
No. My brother, a couple people call them fresas. That's what they call them.
Yeah. And I'm like, I could have maybe that could have been me, but I'm I feel in an odd way, very fortunate that we like kind of took a big hit. Maybe my parents don't. I hope that, you know, if they listen to this, that they understand that I'm also speaking a little bit tongue in cheek, but but yeah, that's kind of my background a little bit. That's how what's the word? I kind of like position myself or identify myself. There you go, to answer the first question.
Yeah. And can you know, because we moved from Mexico to Chicago when I was like 4 or 5. So even I know, asking this question, like, I'm like, I can't really like pull a bunch of memories, but what do you remember from Ecuador? And like, what's Ecuador like to like, because I saw you recently were back. Yeah. So what's it like for someone that's never been there, you know?
Well, so I probably moved there when I was around 3 to Panama, moved from there to Panama. So I don't remember very much of my childhood.
Yeah.
I remember a little bit about Panama. I have terrible memory to this day. I don't think I remember before 12. But no, I do remember a little bit of Panama. And it was, you know, I think I had a very specific perspective on Panama because since my dad worked for Johnson & Johnson, he and we had moved there, a lot of his world was his coworkers and his job, and but I don't really remember very much of it anyway. But it seemed like a nice life. But I did spend some time in Ecuador as a teenager. My dad worked there for a little bit, so we would we went and visited once for a few. Was it like, I think it was like an extended stay for a little bit. And I think that was like 11. And it's funny because at the time I kind of, you know, as a kid, you're kind of a brat. So I kind of hated it. I was like, get me out of here. Yeah. I want all my normal stuff and my house and my like normal bed and my video games. But it really made an impact on me. I really loved those memories a lot. And I think that was also around that age, being in Ecuador and kind of being away from my normal place. I think it had an effect on me as a writer too. That was probably one of the times where I watched the most like stuff because they had a little like kind of bootleg rental, like a fake Blockbuster with like with VHSs that were clearly like somebody's wedding taped over with The Godfather. So I watched a lot of those, and sometimes you'd take stuff and it'd be dubbed, and I'd get mad because I'd be like, oh, I don't want to hear someone over like The Godfather. But I watched like a lot of the big classics during that time, just because, you know, I had nothing to do. But I also got to see a lot of Ecuador at that time. Got to see Quito, which my mom spent a little bit of time there as well, and got to see a lot of Guayaquil. Got to see my family because I didn't grow up with my. A lot of my family ended up moving to Florida, you know, because that kind of became our home base. So they ended up moving. But at the time, I didn't really know my uncles and aunts and cousins, and so I spent a lot of time with them and kind of. You know, that was a really great experience. So I had not been back since then, in 20 years. So I went back this time because my mom hadn't been back in 20 years. And so I foolishly spent the money I made from TV shows and made a little vacation for us, and for my wife went too. And it was the first time for her seeing it. And it was very nostalgic and very nice. My mom grew up in Guayaquil, and that's where I've spent most of my time. But we decided to go to Quito because it's more picturesque and more vacation-y. And she actually spent a little bit of time there. My mom, her mother died very young, so she was sent to live with different people at different times, and she lived in Quito as a little girl. So it's very like nostalgic for her and very nice.
Yeah. That's a very nice gift you gave her.
Yeah. I think she really enjoyed it. She really loved it. There's a very funny Instagram video of us. We saw some horses, just people riding like horses really fast down the street, but also just we went to I don't remember where it was, but it was like some like mountains that we went to go see some nature, and there were some horses, and the horse was neighing, and my mom just started going ee, ee, and she was delighted, and then the horse started running towards her and she screamed and ran away. Very fun. But I really loved going back. I want to go back more often. I think that was always a priority that's always something I wanted to do, but it's been, it's tough to find the time, but also it's expensive to travel to another country. But it actually, the thing I've learned is South America, and I've been to Mexico to vacation, and it's actually very much more affordable than you like. Yeah. I've never been to Europe, never been to Asia, but I imagine it's a lot more affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And what did your mom do for a living while you were growing up?
My mom did not do anything because machismo is real.
Got it.
Yeah. I think my dad didn't really want. Maybe I'm being too honest. I hope they don't hear. But no, she, loved both my parents. They're both wonderful people. But I think he didn't really want her to work, even though there were times where she probably should have, because we had some rough patches. Mm-hmm. But no, it was very important for them to not have her work when I was growing up. But she studied fashion design in Ecuador, I believe, in Panama. And she was that's what she did. She has a lot of, she has like a big portfolio book of her designs, which are beautiful and on some of them insane. She has one dress that looks like a fish, like it literally has like the fish eyes on it. It's very cool looking, and it looks like almost like a sci-fi type of vibe. But some of it is very like fun 80s like design. Some of it a little bit some of it actually very modern. I went and scanned a bunch of them because I was like, one day I want to use these designs because they're so crazy looking and so beautiful and so interesting and kind of genuinely like I think when she studied it was like the runway type of thing, not just like making clothes for every day. So they're actually very creative, and some of them were like, for example, she made some of the assignments were like make clothes out of like not construction paper, but like out of like a material you wouldn't. So she made it out of gift wrap or something like that, and it just looks crazy. That's just a photo. That dress did not survive. It's made out of paper.
That is a lot of those like fashion school assignments. It's like,
but yeah, no, my mom did not work, but like I said, my dad was a salesman, and my mom did a little bit of odd, like little odd jobs, but nothing like as a career growing up. Which, I think that looking at her designs, I think she had a lot of talent, so it's like a shame. But I also think that for my mom, in a way, it also, culturally, it was very important for her to grow up with her kids and to be there. So yeah, like it's a mixed bag. I think.
And so you're growing up in Florida. So can you just sort of talk us through like what your household was like? Because it's curious to me, just from like knowing you a little bit. It's just like I'm curious about what the household was like, and did you like feel like an immigrant growing up?
Yeah. Well, Florida is interesting because Florida is, it's not. I've never been to Ohio, but it's not Ohio. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of it's a very diverse place, but there's also a lot of Latinos. Mm-hmm. And it's very I think there were moments where I felt definitely different, and I think that I grew up, I think maybe having a little bit of what's the word? Definitely a insecurity about that stuff and wanting to kind of Americanize, which I think a lot of people do, and that's something that I've already, gone to therapy for and figured out. But I think that as a kid coming here at 6 years old, you definitely feel like a need to fit in, and especially from South America. Well, not especially from South America. I think any Latin American country or maybe any country, period, you come in here and you feel a little out of step. Mm-hmm. And even in Florida, going to school with people who are maybe third generation, fourth generation. A lot of Cubans moved much earlier. Mm-hmm. I think I did feel like a big deficit that I needed to make up for. And maybe culturally, I kind of skewed more towards culture that was, sitcoms and movies and music that was American or, more traditionally like mainstream. And I think that in some ways shaped me, and in other ways also now that internal conversation over why did I do that has influenced my work. I hope, even though I write very silly comedies, I think it has influenced my work and my perspective. But we grew up in Plantation in a townhouse in a little community. What was it called? I think it was Jacaranda Lakes or something. I don't know. Florida's all these little weird communities. I found out recently there's like a lot of like Florida, South Florida and Broward is weird because there's like a lot of gated communities, but they're not nice houses. And you're like, what's going on here? Not that our house was like awful or anything, but you're always like, seems like overkill. And I found out that's the way they raise the rents, and like the money is they just put that in, and they're like, oh no, and now it goes up a tier.
Yeah,
but South Florida, it's always these weird gated communities, but it's weird because also the gates are always open. So it's like, what is this for? Who's this fooling? But we grew up in a townhouse in this place, and I think a lot of our neighbors were, we had like Jewish neighbors, we had a lot of American neighbors, but my family had moved over there, so I feel like very insular with my family. Like that was my community more than anything else, was my more immediate and extended family.
Yeah. And I like to ask about high school.
Yeah.
So the sort of how I lead into it is, for high school, it's like, who were you pretending to be, and how did people see you?
I mean, I had a pretty weird high school experience. I think that it's not my favorite time of my life, but I grew up kind of religious. My family was kind of religious, and my brother went to like a just normal public school, and he didn't get into anything like bad. Like he just was like smoking weed and stuff, and my mom freaked out because obviously you freak out. You're like, my kids are like, so she found this weird kind of homeschool-y type of thing with very few people that was very religious, and she actually taught there to have us go to it.
Got it.
And so me and my sister grew up in a really kind of a weird high school environment, which is not my favorite thing in the world, because it was a little bit very conservative and honestly not very like diverse. So very like white Christian conservative, which is kind of the worst version of that.
Truly that.
And I was very unhappy. But I think in that time I was finding myself and kind of rebelling against it in my own ways, but I also was a very good kid and a very good boy who liked to follow the rules. So it was like a weird time where I kind of found, I think that also defined me a little bit. But you also feel oddly inadequate, because I was like starting to realize around 16, 17 that they weren't teaching us stuff that was real or made sense or giving us a good education. Not that Florida public schools are giving you a great education either, because I went to them for elementary, middle school, and I know that that's not great either. I had a weird time, and my family also, our church was like a small, like kind of more warehousey type Pentecostal church. So I don't, that's not my favorite time period of my life, but I also think it probably shaped me in a lot of ways, but not, I think I'm a little bit of a loner because of it, because I definitely receded through high school. I definitely was like, I don't like this, and I'm just going to kind of put myself in a little cocoon. And I really honestly had no friends in high school. But I don't know if I had gone to a normal high school if that would have been any different, to be honest. I think I think that made me more of a loner, but I'm definitely have a little bit of lonery type, uncomfortable in large groups.
Got it.
I've gone to your mixers and tried to force myself, but especially moving to LA, I definitely tried to force myself to meet people, because it can be so lonely. And I know I can seem very outgoing, but I have a lot of anxiety surrounding people.
Through high school, did you have like an idea of what you wanted to do afterwards? Yeah,
I have wanted to be a writer almost my whole life. I've known that since I was like 10. I wanted to write, direct, do that kind of thing. That's always been my thing. I don't know why. I think honestly, it's because when I moved here, I wanted to be American, and I watched a lot of stuff, and I just identified so strongly with it. When I started elementary school, they tried to put me in the ESL classes, the English as a second language classes. And first of all, my dad was furious because they put both me and my sister in them when we moved here. And I think rightfully so, I think that they kind of noticed that that's a way to, in some ways it's good, and in some ways it's a way, I think maybe the intention's good, but it's definitely a way to separate and segregate and maybe give some people slightly worse educations. And I'm not trying to, I think there's definitely people who have gone into ESL courses and have, excelled. I'm not trying to like put that down.
Yeah, but there's definitely not
the American education system finds ways.
Yeah, and it's like a very, especially with like ESL, it's very blanket. Like, oh, you're from a different country.
Yeah,
you don't speak like then you must not speak English. Then this is the education we're going to give you, and it's like this happened to me. It's like a lot of like interesting cases where it's like if you move here at like very young, you sort of just really pick it up, so it's not as required for you.
Yeah.
And from my experience, where like they were teaching me more Spanish than I even knew.
Yeah.
And I knew more English than Spanish, so I was like, it just wasn't working. You know?
Yeah. I feel like there's probably there is a version of ESL that is really great, and I didn't like grow up in it because my dad got furious and they put us in the other classes, but they found out almost immediately that I already knew English, even though my parents didn't speak it, just from TV. Yeah. I just picked it up, and I was an English speaker since basically I started school. So I think I always learned a lot about American culture, I think, from television and movies, which is good and bad. There's a lot of bad lessons on TV. But yeah, anyway, what I was trying to say is that I think immediately something clicked. I think when I watched TV here, just something like clicked in my brain, and it took me a while to figure out what that meant and what writing was and what you do, but I always kind of did it in some way or another.
You sort of mentioned like you got it from like watching TV at a young age. Is there like, because I always like to like know like where was the seed planted that it was like that you even maybe knew that this was like something you could go to school for,
right,
a career to pursue. So where did that, and were you like writing during school,
Well, I wrote a lot during school for assignments. I would take them very, they would be, I mentioned as a religious class, they'd be like, you got to write about this, this topic. And I would just kind of write about something else and write a short story. I wrote a lot of short stories, but I think the moment where I understood what it was, I think early on, I remember watching Animaniacs and seeing the names come up at the end and being like, oh, who are these people? Even the animators, Steven Spielberg's name would pop up, even though I'm sure now I know a little bit more, probably wasn't in the writer's room or in the animator's room looking over the drawings. I know he probably was just, but I was like, oh, I think I know that name, and kind of figuring it out and connecting the dots. But I didn't really understand it as a thing that you went to school for until my brother was also very into film, which probably really influenced me. And my brother's 10 years older.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just super into it. When it was time for him to go to college, he didn't want to go. He didn't want to do it. And my mom was like, basically told him, if you don't do it, you're not going to live in this house or whatever. She tried to do ultimatums. It's like, you're just going to do it. You're just going to do it. And so their compromise was that he went to the Art Institute in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. And so he just studied film. So he's like, I'll do it if I can just study this. So he would come home and bring his assignments, his movies. So at a very young age, I was watching like the mainstream boilerplate film curriculum, the Citizen Kanes, the Birth of a Nations, which I did not understand at the time. And I kind of started gravitating towards some of those people and some of those filmmakers and some of those writers even. And I kind of started forming an identity as a writer through that stuff. And my first short stories were all set like in the 30s and 40s. I was a little boy with no idea what the hell I was writing about.
Hilarious.
But also The Simpsons was a huge thing where my parents didn't want me to watch it, but I watched it. I was obsessed with it. So I think there's a lot of things that contributed to me going into specifically comedy writing because I was kind of piecing stuff together. And The Simpsons was a big one, but also all that stuff from the 30s and 40s is inherently kind of funny even when it's being serious. So you kind of like developed this weird style.
Yeah. And so like, what did you do after high school? Like, what was the plan, and like, did it go according to plan?
So I was honestly a little depressed as I was graduating high school. I felt like a little insecure about my education, and especially as a writer, I was like a little bit. I knew I was a writer at that point, but I was like, I don't really feel like I've had an opportunity to learn this stuff. I hadn't read and now I was a child, so I didn't know. You're insecure about everything. But now I know that like a lot of people go through high school without like knowing fine literature, but at the time I had this image that's like,
it.
oh, you go in high school and you're reading The Great Gatsby and Moby Dick, and I'm like, no, you don't. You skim it and do an assignment.
Absolutely.
But at the time I was really insecure about it, so I was like, I'm not a writer. I don't really know. I'm gonna feel so stupid. And my mom did the same thing with me, and she's like, you have to go to a college. And I don't know why, but I picked Emerson College in Boston. I actually didn't know it was like a big comedy writing school. I didn't know very much about it. My uncle lived in New Hampshire because he's a doctor, and he lived near there. So I was like, oh, that'll be like good for me because I won't be completely alone. And I knew I wanted to leave Florida because I had so many bad associations with it. And my family is very, very close. I'm very defined by my family. I love my parents, and I love my sister, my brother, but I also felt like I had to get away. And so I definitely tried to pick a place that was far away and just kind of picked it on a map. And I was like, film school, close to my uncle. And I just applied to only that school thinking I actually wouldn't get in, too, because I was like, it's either this or nothing. And I was shocked to see I got in, and I was shocked to see that I had, they gave financial aid and all this stuff. And I was like, oh shit, I gotta go. And then I did college, and I was very depressed during college, but I made a lot of really great friends, and I learned a lot about writing. It was I would think I grew up very, very sheltered. So that was the first time not being sheltered ever. Ever. Like not being with my parents, not being in a religious kind of environment, and not being basically in a weird homeschool environment. So that was like a culture shock. And I was also kind of, honestly, apart from the homeschooling, the first time I was interacting with people who were not, like I said, I didn't have a lot of friends, and most of my environment was my family. So it was also like getting used to, I think there was still the insecurity of trying to present as very like Americanized. So I think that kind of all swirled into like a weird depression for a few years.
I mean, that stuff will mess you up. Like, just trying to be, because I feel like at the time it was like a very 90s thing for immigrants to come to this country and like assimilate, be an American ideal, which is based in whiteness. And it messes with people. Like, it's like I'm just barely starting to like unpack all that stuff. And it's a process. It
is a process. And I think a big breakthrough for me has been starting to write about stuff that's not trying to force myself to be like, okay, I'm just going to write a sitcom about the standard boilerplate sitcom about the white family and the slob husband and the hot wife or whatever dumb thing people have been doing.
But it's stuff that you have to like unlearn to even realize that it's like, because you could very well not even realize that's a thing. And it's like all this behavior and like stuff that we have to just unlearn from just like living in a society where it's definitely very like homogenous in the content they're putting out.
It is. It's getting better, I think. And I think that definitely there's been this push to diversify, which, is tricky. It's tricky. It's like happening, but it's happening in odd ways in some ways. But I don't want to like future employers. I love your specific thing you're doing. But yeah, I think it's definitely getting better. It makes me feel like a little bit of hope. I would like to one day create a show, and it makes me feel like, okay, maybe there's a marketplace for the kind of thing I'd like to do one day. And also, I think now we've kind of gotten out of the way a lot of the introductory stuff of like upstanding, ideal Latinx characters. And I'm like, okay, now let's get to the juicy stuff. And it definitely, like, things are coming out now that are more in that vein. But I'm like, all right, let's do it. No more like upstanding, great, beautiful depictions, which are great. I'm not, but I am, and I would feel, I think that that's still very important. I think especially with programming for like families and younger kids, I think that's super, super duper important. But I'm also like, let's get to the, I'm as a viewer of, these prestige dramas, I'm like, all right, let's get the Mad Men for this stuff where it's like the characters are complicated.
And it's like, complicated. Like,
and then we have those too.
And the narratives are just not like, the very good, like good immigrant or like brownness as acceptable to whiteness. So like you come out of Emerson. Do you have like, this is what I asked a lot when I first started the podcast, just because I'm like very based in plans. But like, did you have a plan? Did you know what you wanted to do? How you wanted to get there?
Through the process of going to Emerson, I went in being like, I'm a drama writer. Or I wanted to be a director. I still do. That's still a dream of mine. But I wanted to write and direct my own stuff, and I thought of myself as just like a drama writer. But through the course of it, the stuff that I gravitated to there was comedy and comedy writing. And I had a professor, Marty Cook, who was very encouraging in that, who taught the sitcom writing class. She wrote for Full House, which I was very familiar with. Like I said, I grew up on 90s American sitcoms. But she encouraged me to apply to a diversity internship at Comedy Central that was called the Rock Turns. It was Chris Rock started the program. By the time I got in it, he was not associated with it, but they're like, we're going to keep your name. Shut up, Chris Rock. I don't know which celebrity was associated with it at that point, but it was one of those. And so the program was designed to give us 2 weeks in different departments. And so I spent a week at the Colbert Show, a week at the Daily Show, and then a week at the digital department, and a week at the on-air promo, who do the commercials in-house for Comedy Central shows. And another department, which I'm sorry, but I already forgot what it was because it didn't click for me. Oh, development. Got it. I love the development department. It was my favorite one. No, I started doing freelance work for their digital department, which, again, probably too much information, but was paid pennies.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially back then, social media and the internet was so new that there were no rules and there was no expectation of it being a high-paying job. But that was enough for me to survive in New York and to start doing stand-up. So I did stand-up in New York for 8 years. And that's how I kind of found my way.
How did you even get to stand up? How did that was something that you thought you could do and did? The
simple answer is I wanted to keep making short films in college. I really loved that. I made awful, terrible, shitty short films I don't want anybody to see. I don't even consider them. I made a short film recently and I consider it my first short film because the other ones really were student. I was learning. But I love that so much, but I didn't have the money to do that. At the time, my parents were probably a little bit more not quite at their best financially, and I kind of had to figure out a way to be creative with very little. Basically, the money I made at Comedy Central. As much as I kind of made fun of the very small amount, which they probably do deserve to get. A lot of companies paid freelancers very little money, at that time and probably to this day. But as much as that's probably a problem, and I'm not going to deny that, I'm very grateful for that time, that money, because without it, I could not have lived in New York and figured out that stand-up is something I could do. And the reason I started thinking of stand-up is because it's cheap or free to do. You might have to pay $5 for an open mic. As I got along, I learned to avoid those because those are scams. But I learned I could do it for free almost every night. It was just an avenue to hone and to shape my comedic voice, which I was now at that point starting to think maybe I'm a comedy writer. And it was starting to solidify. And I think it paid off. It was I learned as much in stand-up in New York as I did in any other aspect of my life. That was as much schooling as anything else.
Got it.
Yeah.
And what were your parents sort of thinking this whole time? Did they have any thoughts about what you were pursuing with the work you were doing, anything?
They, at that point, were very supportive, but they had a lot of years to get used to the fact that I was not going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a president.
There's still time for that.
Yeah, there's still time. I think early on when I told my parents, I think they were a little bit more uncomfortable with the idea for a lot of reasons. I think particularly my dad was, they were a little religious, and they kind of, you kind of see Hollywood and that world is kind of bad. At one point he made a comment like that and I got furious and he apologized immediately, and I think that was a huge turning point on their road to acceptance. So maybe there was some people in my family who were a little bit more worried about it for those reasons. So my grandma she's gotten older. She has dementia now. And I had to travel with her from Long Island to Florida because my parents wanted to see her and she needed a companion. And we were waiting for the airplane. in the terminal, and she relives every few minutes. She kind of like sometimes, you know how that happens to people. And at one point she asked me, so she thought I was much younger than I was. My nickname is Tito. She'd be like, Tito, what are you studying in school? You must be in college. And I was like, oh, I already graduated. I'm actually a writer now. And she went, oh my God, no, Dios mío, no. She started like panicking. And like literally like a minute, she was like, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. And literally a minute later, she asked me the exact same question. And I tell her, Abuelita, I'm a writer now. It's like not a big deal. I'm making a living. It's fine. And she was like, no, it's not going to work out. And then she asked me again. And I swear to God, I said, I'm a lawyer. And she was so happy.
Yes.
And that's how we got along.
That's funny. You should have lied to her the second time.
Yeah, Again,
shame
I'm a good boy.
Shame on you for that.
I'm a good boy, but
I still lie to Grandma.
I don't want to lie to her. But everybody's a lot more comfortable with the idea because, now I've hopefully writing is always I thought I had this image that you become a TV writer and it's over, like you're done.
Oh yeah.
Like you win and you get it in. It's always a struggle. You're always kind of fighting for the next job and hoping to get the next job. But I think they've seen that I can do it. So now people are more comfortable and a little bit less scared when I'm unemployed for a little bit.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of fear, I think, in the Latino community.
Yeah.
Over art type, like those kind of jobs. Because those aren't the jobs, honestly, those aren't the jobs people came over here with the dreams of their kids having. But my parents both are so much more supportive. I did stand up for 8 years in New York, and if you want to talk about unsupportive parents, American white parents are the biggest assholes to their kids who are doing stand up. They're like so upset that that's what their kids are doing. My parents were delighted because my parents are also very artistic, both of them. Mm-hmm. And they love the fact I was doing comedy. They love the fact I was bringing joy to people. So honestly, they believed in me when I didn't. I was just like, I don't know if this is going to work.
You have mentioned, the life of a writer, how there's like starts and stops, and it's like, it's still a gig, you do a gig, it ends, and you have to get the next one. So I would just for the audience too, just to like get like a summary of like what your experience has been like, and when you felt like you got your start and the process of that.
So like I mentioned, I did stand up for 8 years, and out of that I was contacted by a friend who became an assistant at an agency who just started sending me packets. So late night packets, if people are listening, late night packets. It's how you apply to comedy late night jobs. So The Daily Show, Jimmy Fallon, all that stuff. I started getting sent those, and I started just throwing myself at them. That was like a period where I just was like, I'm going to do this. And it timed up really well because I had recently been fired and I was desperate, and I was going out on job interviews at that point for social media jobs because that's what I'd done freelance, and I didn't know shit about Twitter. So I'd go into these meetings and I'd be like, I am passionate about social media. It is my passion. And they'd be like, oh, so you know what a Twitter campaign is, how to contact them and do it? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, how would you do it? I was like, I don't know.
They called your bluff.
Yeah, I was literally just writing jokes for Comedy Central. For their Twitter account at that point. But I was doing these packets and I was unemployed, and I just dove into them and that was my full-time job. And then a coincidence, right as I was getting pretty good at them, I think, my friend Adam Conover, who did stand-up in New York, sold his show Adam Ruins Everything, and he sent out a request for packets to a bunch of funny stand-ups in New York, and a lot of the people that he saw at open mics and at shows that he was like, that person's really funny, and I was on that list, and I submitted a packet, and I honestly, that changed my life. I owe a lot for him believing in me, because I like a lot of people, I have no connections in the industry, and I still I have now some, but I didn't grow up in it the way that some people did. So it was honestly like the biggest thing. That was probably the happiest day of my life, is getting that job.
And so like, what was the experience of like writing on that show? Because it's a very particular type of show, Yeah,
but I also didn't know what shows were. I didn't know what writer's room were like. I didn't know what was expected or what the workload was. So I thought it was all very normal. But that show's a hard show to write for. And the writers on it I haven't written for it in a while. I know that there's Adam's got a lot more stuff in the works, but the writers on that show are amazingly talented, including myself. No, no, but it's a really hard show. I think you have to understand the thing you're talking about, the thing you're writing about really well, and then you have to write like tons of jokes per page, because it's really dry information. So you have to you basically make the argument and then you just punch it up and punch it up and punch it up and make it silly and fun. It has a lot of its audience are kids, and you really have to make it. It was not the intent. The intent was like Daily Show, John Oliver, but True TV is a family network, and they kind of pushed us in that direction. And I'm so grateful that they did, because I'm very proud. I worked on that first season, and I'm very proud that I have not written on anything else that many kids have. Like my little cousin, I just was at a thing and he just ran up to me. He's like, "That's my favorite show." It's like, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. And I really love that about that show. And I'm very proud of it, especially having worked on the first 2 seasons, because being in the first season of a show is like magical. And if it's a good show, yeah. You feel like you're building something. But also, to answer your question, being in it, I was a little bit insecure at first, but a weird thing about me is I'm very shy until there's a creative thing on the table.
Got it.
And then my opinions are just, I can't not say them, even if I sometimes shouldn't. And, I'm always very respectful, and I think I'm a very hard worker, but if I see a thing and I'm like, I don't like that part, I have to, my brain, I think it, and I'm like, I hate that, and then I'm like, okay, say it constructively, and then it has to go through the maze and come out like, how about instead, because of this, we say this?
You like love that idea.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the learning experience too. But I think because I grew up very polite and very like taught to be very polite, I think that wasn't a big leap for me. I think it's a big leap for some people, but I had known how to say something like a criticism or a note without coming across like an asshole, although I'm very sure that there's some showrunners that disagree.
That's hilarious. Yeah, because that was such an interesting show. It's fascinating that kids watch it, just because it's very, I don't know, that's so strange to me that like, but then it's also like shows you like, just from what I watched on that show, it's like a very woke show. Yeah. Like I've noticed casting decisions. I've noticed like just the topics that are being picked to like debunked and like give information, and I guess the kids are getting this information now. But you could tell in that show that was like very intentional in the way that they wanted to. I
think it was, and I think obviously that is something that now is super important, and in some ways that can be a mask, for some places. But I don't think it was because, I know it wasn't because I was there, but I think that in that show in particular, like that show started a few years ago, and I think it was a little bit ahead of the curve. And I think a lot of the credit goes to the people behind those decisions, and the casting director Lindsay Weissmuller I think puts a lot of thought into that, and I think a lot of the producers John Wolfe and John Cohen put a lot of thought into that and a lot of care. Yeah, I think that they care about that a lot, and are very conscious of that, and were conscious of it early on, and in ways that I don't think people were. That was a note from above. I think that was them, and I think that was Adam. I think Adam deserves a lot of credit for that. I think Adam was very aware that it was a show with a white guy telling people what was wrong with the world, and he wanted to mitigate that. And that's also why the show's so self-deprecating, because he wanted to say it's not about me being a smart genius. I'm kind of an idiot in some ways, the character in particular. And I think that's why that show's popular. I think if he had been, I think he was very aware of what it looked like.
And it's amazing to even be aware of that, because it's so easy to not even register. So like, what did you do after?
After that was done, I applied to I did the packet stuff again. I was like, I need work. And I got hired at Jimmy Kimmel Live, and I worked there for about 2 years. I did the Oscars twice during that time. And during that time, I really wanted to write for scripted. Like, that's been my
Got it.
goal.
Yeah.
That's been what I'm going for. And I just started writing samples a lot during that time and kind of thinking about that and trying to plan my steps. And then, again, it's a lot of this stuff. I want to be very honest about what careers are like, because I think it's very important. Some of it is who you know and making connections. And Adam Conover recommended me to his partner, Lisa Hannawalt. And I sent her the script, and they really liked it, and I got hired at Tuca and Birdie. She's the creator of Tuca and Birdie. I like to be honest about that stuff, because I think one thing that I always had this image of, like, I think a lot of people feel very insecure about their writing sometimes, and about sending out stuff because they're not getting responses. Who you know is so important. I've gotten lucky sometimes, and I have not known people on stuff. I didn't know the people at Jimmy Kimmel Live. They hired me off the strength of the packet.
Got it.
I did have a recommendation for that off of someone, but I always like to be honest about that, because it's like, they think there's two things that people are not honest about. It's how they get jobs and money.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's very important to be honest about both.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it's absolutely true, because there are people like working in the industry who are like considered gods to some people who are like trying to be that. And it's like trying to compare like apples and oranges. It's like, well, this, like, sure, this person's talented and all this stuff, but it's like they also had like these things lined up. Yeah. And that's also just from speaking to writers. I've noticed that the people who are like working their dream jobs and are like working in an industry and sort of like building a career, just from talking to them, I've noticed it's like dumb luck. Yeah. It's timing, and a lot of it's like privilege and the whole expanse of what that could mean.
And I don't want to discourage anybody, because I started doing stand-up in New York at 21 with zero connections at all. And I think that my bird's eye view of that stuff, or like the long-term view, is I've seen a lot of people who are as talented as me or more not make it. And I've seen the opposite, obviously. You always see that. But it took me 8 years of being broke in New York to get somebody's attention, and for someone to take a chance on me. And the fact of the matter is, when you don't have connections and you don't have money, that is what happens. Yeah. That is, you have to sacrifice a lot. And that is unfair, but I didn't have to sacrifice as much as other people by any means. I had a grand old time doing stand-up in New York and eating dollar pizza every night. Genuinely happy memories. And I think a lot of people go through that, but and it's not like a torture, but I think that sometimes hard work is a cover for not being honest. And I think I'm a very hard worker and I work very hard, but there's definitely ingredients to that stew that were not just skill and talent. That being said, Lisa Hannawalt was an amazing boss who really tried to pick people from all different parts. It felt like that was a great room, because it wasn't all people from one connection. Got it. And she really, I love that room. And that was a very, that was also one of the most diverse rooms I've ever been in. And I think it was important for her to do that. And I think maybe I'm very fortunate to have been in that room. And you have like this like, to be in a room where there are different kinds of people is really helps a show.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to, the industry's, talking about like diversity and inclusion. I think that's half the conversation that's going on in this town, but maybe 10% are doing something about it. And I think that speaks to like the people in charge who like make it's like a decision to do. Like it just doesn't happen organically. Yeah. If you're just hiring the people and the recs you're getting, believe it or not, some of those people tend to all be the same, So it's important to like, I think Adam ruins everything, just the topics they were covering and the things that I was just saying on screen. And then just like building a room, it's like somebody made the decision that that's how they wanted to, build their workplace.
I think the fact of the matter is that maybe this is just my perspective, maybe this isn't true, but the first script that you have as your sample, or the first, before you get hired on a show and are in a room breaking story, that script is not going to be perfect. Someone needs to see something in it. And the way that people can see something in it is for someone to be told, hey, this person's really great. They're really funny. They're really nice. They're really pleasant. And the networks of people in those that get recommended came from a very tight, small pool. Yeah. That's just the facts. And I think now showrunners and creators have to prioritize trying to read the samples from people that are looking for staff writers with those same eyes as if they got a recommendation. Or I know that that's tough because you're reading hundreds. Yeah. Or you need to ask people, I am specifically looking to broaden this. And if someone recommends you, give them that same level of, I'm looking for the great joke in the first act that tells me that they'll be good in the room. Because nobody has... Well, not nobody. Some people have amazing, brilliant scripts, and I hate them for it.
They're geniuses and they're brilliant.
They just nail it. They nail it before they've had the experience. But you learn so much from those first few jobs, and that's why recommendations early on are so valuable to showrunners. So I totally understand it. I'm not saying that that's not true, and I also think most of the jobs, I think it's been a mix. You do some people who are recommended, you do some people you try to keep, read things cold and try to pick people from that pile too. That's important. And I'm not saying that the jobs I've had, people have all been recommended directly, but I guess what I'm saying is that that's a challenge. That's a challenge that happens. That's true.
And it's something that it has to be working from both sides. Like someone has to be looking outside their circle, making a choice to purposely look for certain kinds of people or broaden their scope. And it's also the people on the other end that's why I like that you were honest about recommendations and how jobs, just because it's when you see someone succeeding, you see their name in the credits, you think they handed in the perfect script and it's just they were given the golden ticket from there. Yeah. And I think it's good to know for any writer who's trying to do this for a living that there's more than that. You have to people have to like you. You have to put yourself out there. People have to see your face. They have to know the sort of things you have to talk to people, build relationships.
Yeah, and people, I think a big thing that is very true is that when you're building a room, you're also building a group of people, a team that you want to spend time with those people, and a recommendation is huge because you do not want to take a risk on having a bad person in your room because people are bad people. And I mean bad people, sometimes it's just they're not very talkative, sometimes they're not, but sometimes they're actual bad people. You don't want that in your room. I get that. But yeah, I look back at my sample that got me Tuca and Birdie, and I'm not this thing was perfect. I've rewritten it. I've reworked it. I learned a lot from the experiences being in rooms. And I think that that's something that's also not talked about. It's there's this idea of writing the perfect, beautiful, pristine sample. Yeah. And that is important to strive for. And if you have it, it's going to help a lot. Yeah. But also... Sometimes people are read more generously than others. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I am curious about just how you see your Latinx identity in the way that you incorporate it into your writing. Sure. And also on the shows you've been working on. How have you found community in those rooms? Have you found that you had to be representative or had a responsibility?
Sure. I will be very honest. All of my jobs, I'm not going to single out any job. I've now worked with a ton of Latinx people. I think that's not great. We live in Los Angeles. There's a lot.
There's a couple out here.
You literally can go outside of the street and point. Yeah. But that being said, I have been able to express that part of myself in the rooms I've worked in. Adam Ruins Everything in particular was probably the first time that I really had an opportunity to do that. I wrote the episode about immigration. I wrote it, I think it's probably 30% Spanish dialogue. And that was the first time for me writing in Spanish. It was huge. It was a huge deal and it was a great opportunity. Yeah. And I really learned how to write like that because it'd been years since I'd really even attempted that. Yeah. And I hope if anybody watches that episode, they forgive me if I have any grammatical errors because I was, again, the only person in the room to be I think this is right. I think on Tuca and Birdie, they're all bird people, so it didn't come up in that way. But I think, it's a part of you, so you always kind of write a little bit of that, and I think the characters, there's things that filter in. I can't think of anything in particular, but my sense of humor is kind of shaped by that, and it's not always in an overt way. It's not always like, references to
so like Selena or like...
Yeah, exactly. Although there are some in my samples. But it's not always that. Sometimes you can write a joke for a character who's not Latinx, but who the joke is somehow informed by your experience, by your parents, by a funny thing that your parent did or your sister or whatever did. And I'm sure Toucan Birdie's littered with those. And Undone is the last show I worked on, and that's like much more obvious how that factored in.
Yeah.
But I wrote on the second season of that, and it's the second time I will have something on TV that has a lot of Spanish. I'd say like a good probably 20-30% of that script is in Spanish because it takes place in Mexico City, and that felt more like I was there's characters in it literally named after family members who you've edited out their names.
Is there a Tito in there?
There is not a Tito. I have not worked a Tito in anything. I should.
That's such a like Latinx nickname because it's like,
because it also makes no sense. It has no connection to anything.
Absolutely.
Which is like all my family's nicknames. I'm like, nope.
It's like I don't even know this person's real name. Find it out, and I'm like, wait. And something I am curious about. It's like your name is Gonzalo Cordova. What do people like? I'm just like thinking like, what is the reaction? What is the assumptions? What is like?
I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
Because you are applying for jobs with no way that they see you. So I have no idea what their image is, or what their idea is, or what they think that they're going to get in that interview room. And there is a little bit of the name is my name is my name. I'm not gonna go by my middle name or something to ease that, but and also the name in some ways I'm like, am I in this interview? I want to be very honest because these are not good 100% positive, super cool, being Latinx is awesome and positive identity. It's like you go in and you're like, am I in here for this reason? Do I have to talk about that in this interview? Is that what you kind of ask yourself those questions, and those questions can trip you up sometimes for sure, and add a little bit of stress. That's like a little tricky sometimes. You're like, okay, I'm Gonzalo Cordova. This is a show maybe with one Latinx character in it. Am I in here to speak to this? But I've embraced that aspect of it because Gonzalo is so much a part of me. And it's funny, speaking about Americanization, as a kid in high school, and I had a job at a comic book store. I went by Robert, which is my middle name, and I tried to make that work, and it just felt wrong. And when I got to college, I was like, I'm Gonzalo. I'm very sorry to all my ancestors. And I've gone by Gonzalo my whole life. Since then, and professionally, that's the name I use. That's how I'm credited, and that's definitely like some family members were like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting, cool."
And another thing I'm curious about is like, do people ever ask you like, "What are you?" Or are they ever like surprised about your like heritage?
I think a lot of Americans, a lot of gringos assume I am Mexican because that's just all they know, especially in LA, to be honest. But I think sometimes I will get asked where I'm from, and the classic thing of you don't know what they're really asking. And so my boilerplate answer is my family's from Ecuador. I grew up in South Florida, even though I am from Ecuador. I think it just simplifies it. I'm not trying to hide that I'm from Ecuador. I think I'm trying to say I spent most of my time in South Florida. South Florida is like the culture I know. I know the Miami stuff and all that stuff. If that's what you're looking for, and the Latinx experience of South Florida, I think that's like the thing I know very well. I grew up in it. If you are writing a show that's set a lot in South America, I want to be on that show, but also maybe hire someone who grew up in South America too. So that's my boilerplate answer.
So, we've been talking about like all of the people you've been working with. So I'm always curious to find or hear about the writers people admire. So these could be the writers that are heroes of yours. These could be your peers. This could be like people you're Instagram stalking just because you're like, I don't know them, but I love the work they're doing. So who are some of those people for you?
Sure. I think I mentioned some employers who I have learned so much from. I think everyone that I've worked with, I've learned a lot from. But I spoke with a lot of affection about Adam Conover as someone who really helped me out. Lisa Hannawalt is an amazing boss. Kate Purdy, who I worked with at Undone. I came out of that show a much better writer, and I learned a lot from them. I feel like the people who I have gotten a lot from in my writing has been my family. I base a lot of stuff on my family, so I'm gonna, even though she is not a writer, my sister, Veronica, is someone who I think a lot about when I'm writing, and I know that that's not like a writer's influence because she's an attorney. She's actually an immigration attorney. I'm very proud of her for that. But she is someone that I've written a lot of characters in her voice, so I know that's not. I base a lot of characters on family members, so I consider them writing influences. Yeah. A writer who I want to mention a Latinx person, but I'm only thinking about people I worked with, and maybe that's an issue.
That speaks to itself, you know?
Yeah, that speaks to itself. You know, I have going to the mixers that you have put up, and I've also been going to the WGA Latino Committee, and to be very honest, that's my first experience working with directly with Latinx or meeting Latinx writers besides stand-up. Stand-up I met a lot. I do have a good name. I do have a really good name. Two people I really admire, the creators of Los Spookies, which is one of my favorite shows, Julio Torres and Ana Fabrejas. I knew them in stand-up. They're very funny, and that show's one of my favorite shows on TV, and it's so interesting and idiosyncratic, and so them, and I think I aspire to create something that's not like that, because that's theirs, but something that's as much me as that's theirs. I also really love the show Pen 15. That's my favorite show. So shout out to all the creators on that. There's the episode about where one of the characters feels very insecure about her house having cultural signifiers, and that really spoke to me because I felt that at that age, and that really moved me. So that's when I watched that, I was like, this isn't a superficial look at identity issues. Yeah. It's not super duper like rah positive. It's actually very honest, and I aspire to write something that good too.
All right, cool. Yeah, so you sort of mentioned coming to the events I do and like the WJ Latino committee. I just want to get your sense of self within all that. Because you've said you haven't worked with a ton of Latinx writers, so I'm always curious to how people see their Latinx and how it fits into larger spaces.
I think I want to have that be a bigger part of my work, so it's been very important to me to enter those communities. I came up in a stand-up community that was not very diverse, and now stand-up is very diverse and it's changed a lot, but a lot of my instincts and writing comedy instincts in particular have been shaped by that, and I just wanted to. I'm an adult now, and I think it's time to take ownership and not just be like, well, this is what I fell into for necessity's sake. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of feeling of I know who I am, but there's also this feeling of oh no, are people going to find out I'm not quite as Latino as somebody else? And that's that's been a fear of mine that also is something that's very important to get over, because it's not one thing, not a monolith. But also, sometimes, to be honest, a lot of Latino people do have these gatekeeping instincts, and I understand it. But I also I have my own perspective, and I think that. I don't know, this is a very weird, honest answer. I feel very comfortable, and actually more comfortable in those spaces than I did in a lot of spaces where I was the only Latino. Yeah. And I'm never comfortable in any space with more than two people. But I definitely, it's been a breath of fresh air, and it has made me want to be in rooms with more people who are... The thing about it is that sometimes the people who hire think that they get a Latino person and they've got the experience covered, and the experiences are so varied and so different from country to country, like country of origin to country of origin. Your culture is so different, and what Latino means and what Latinx means is so different. And when I've been in these mixers in the WGA Latino committee, you feel that. You feel like there's, even though technically diversity is different, people from different ethnicities, you feel diversity in a room full of Latino people. Yeah. So that's how I feel. It makes me much more comfortable with my identity to experience that, because I'm like, oh, there's not a deficiency here because everybody here is so different.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. Yeah. And I just curious because it's like, it's such a like very Latinx experience and not feel like you're Latinx enough, doing it correctly, like fitting into like the monolith that doesn't really exist. Again, there's like common identifiers and maybe like experiences and just culture wise, in a sense that's like is interesting just in a general span of a hemisphere. But that it's not like a thing that we should be measuring ourselves by.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that people are learning that. And by the way, your mixers and the WGA Latino committee are very welcoming. Never felt that there. I have felt that in other spaces for sure. So there's a little bit of hesitancy to work up the courage to go and be like, oh no, what if they don't like me? But again, I feel that literally in any space I go to.
And I also did want to ask you about LA, because you are newish to the city. So what was your experience of moving here, and like I always like to get like a summary of like the first 2 years, because I think it's like the hardest years to live here.
I love it. Great. I loved it immediately. My dream was to write for TV and hopefully film one day, and I felt like I finally did it when I moved here. And there's been a lot of starts and stops, but I came here feeling like I did it, and now I'm like, well, now it's hard. I understand it's hard. After every job, you have to do it again. But I felt like I did it, so I associate a lot of positive feelings with this space. But also, this is as close to Florida as I've lived in a city. I've lived in Boston, enough said, and I've lived in New York, which obviously more diverse, but has its aspects that are very segregated. And LA obviously has some problems with that too, but I've never felt as close to living in Florida as I live in Echo Park. My neighbors are Latinx, and I speak Spanish with them, and it really makes me feel at home.
And, sort of to start wrapping up, where can people find you?
My social media is at Gonzalo R. Cordova on Twitter. On Instagram, if you search my name, I'm sure there's a lot of Gonzalo Cordovas, but just look for the one who looks like a little boy with a mustache. And on Facebook, please do not look me up on Facebook.
And I like to have the writers title their own episode.
Sure.
So with your name will come the title, and there's a prompt. The prompt is a blank Latinx writer.
I thought about this in the car, and I don't got a good answer. The joke answer that I thought of, which I kind of want to do, is a Gonzalo Cordova Latinx writer. But I think I should take it a little more seriously.
I mean, it's truly that feels true to you. And
I think
it's so stupid.
The truth is that I would go with the dumb joke. But I don't know if it's funny, but that was what made me laugh in the car.
I mean, it tickled me. So
all right, great.
If you want to do that,
I can justify it as, I know this is a dumb joke.
That's hilarious, actually.